She has been pushing my husband to divorce. The shift in her demeanor was subtle at first. She had always been there, hovering on the outskirts of our marriage, but I had never truly felt her presence as a threat. We were polite to each other, cordial even, and though I sometimes caught a certain sharpness in her tone or a glint of judgment in her eyes, I never dwelled on it. She was family, after all, or so I thought. It began after a particularly heated argument between my husband and me. Wasn't uncommon for us to clash. We were both strong-willed people with our own opinions, and disagreements were inevitable. This time, it had been about finances. We'd overspent on a renovation, and tensions were high. My husband confided in his mother later that week, seeking reassurance, a kind word, something I couldn't provide in the heat of the moment. I only realized what had happened when she called me a few days later, her voice honeyed but her words razor sharp. It's so hard being married, isn't it? Especially when you're not on the same page. But, well, some couples just aren't meant to be, and that's okay. Her words sat with me long after the conversation ended. I brushed them off at first, assuming she was just being dramatic, but her tone had carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The weeks that followed were riddled with small, pointed comments from her. Each one chipped away at the foundation of my marriage. You know, I always taught him to value independence. He's always been better on his own. Or, I'm sure you're trying your best, dear, but marriage is hard for some people. Especially when personalities don't quite match. She was a master of implication, never outright accusing me of anything but always leaving me questioning myself. Her influence over my husband became impossible to ignore. He started pulling away, not physically, but emotionally. He'd come home from visits with her quieter, distant, like something unspoken was weighing on him. When I asked if everything was okay, he would shrug it off. It wasn't until one evening, after a long day, that I caught a glimpse of what was happening. He left his phone on the kitchen counter, and a notification from her lit up the screen. It wasn't the words that struck me, it was the pattern. I scrolled through weeks' worth of messages, all laced with subtle digs at me. She doesn't seem happy, does she? You deserve to feel supported, not weighed down. Sometimes letting go is the best thing. For both people, I felt a cold fury settle over me. It wasn't just her words, it was the fact that he hadn't stopped her. He hadn't defended me or our marriage. If anything, his silence encouraged her. The tension in our home grew thicker with each passing day. He started spending more time with her, under the guise of needing advice or clearing his head. I began to feel like an outsider in my own life, excluded from the conversations shaping my future. Then came the breaking point. It was a Saturday morning when he sat me down, his face a mask of exhaustion. He said he needed space, that he felt like we'd been growing apart. His words were eerily similar to the ones his mother had been feeding him. It was as though he had become a puppet for her agenda. I tried to fight for us, to remind him of the life we had built together, but her voice was louder than mine, even in his absence. She had planted seeds of doubt so deeply in his mind that I couldn't uproot them. Every time I tried to address the issue, he became defensive, insisting that his feelings were his own. The days stretched into weeks, and her presence loomed over everything. Even when she wasn't physically there, I could feel her shadow. She invited him over for dinners where I wasn't welcome, took him on weekend trips to clear his head, and encouraged him to prioritize his happiness she made sure didn't include me. One afternoon, I stumbled upon her final move. She had sent him a long email, outlining why she believed our marriage was toxic. She listed reasons, skewed and exaggerated, twisting our arguments into signs of irreparable damage. She ended with a chilling line, "Sometimes love means letting go. You'll thank yourself later." It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I wasn't just losing my husband. I was losing him to her manipulation. In the end, he made his choice. Whether it was truly his or simply the result of her constant whispers, I may never know. What I do know is that her meddling cost me everything I had fought to build. As I packed my belongings and walked out of the house we had shared, I couldn't help but feel a bitter mix of grief and anger. She had succeeded, but at what cost? She may have won her son back, but she had left us both broken in the process. The days following my departure were a blur of numbness. I moved into a small apartment across town, an empty, quiet space that echoed with everything I had lost. Each box I unpacked was a reminder of the life I had been forced to leave behind, pictures of us smiling, gifts we had exchanged, mementos from trips we had taken together. Everything felt tainted now, a painful reminder of a marriage dismantled not by its two participants but by the insidious influence of a third. I often found myself replaying moments in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact second everything had begun to fall apart. Was it the first time she criticized me under the guise of a joke? The moment she started monopolizing his time with subtle urgency, presenting herself as the person who understood him better than anyone else? Or was it my own hesitation to push back, my fear of being seen as unreasonable, that allowed her to worm her way into our lives so thoroughly? The bitterness was hard to shake. I found myself angry at her, angry at him, and angry at myself. How could he not see through her manipulations? How could he let her undermine us so completely? And why hadn't I spoken up sooner, called out her behavior for what it was, and fought harder to protect what we had built? But the truth was, I had fought. I had tried. There was only so much I could do when he wasn't willing to stand with me. Weeks turned into months, and I tried to rebuild some semblance of a life. I threw myself into work, took up hobbies I'd long neglected, and tried to find solace in the small things: a good book, a walk in the park, the comfort of a favorite meal. But no matter how hard I tried to move forward, her shadow lingered. Occasionally, I would hear snippets about them through mutual friends or social media. She was still a constant presence in his life, filling the void I had left. The knowledge stung, but it also confirmed what I had long suspected: this was never about what was best for him. It was about her control, her inability to let go, and her willingness to destroy anything that threatened her hold on him. One day, while scrolling through my phone, I came across a photo of us from years ago. We were laughing, carefree, completely unaware of what was to come. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the ache of everything we had lost, but also a strange, quiet clarity. This wasn't just my story, it was his too. He had allowed her influence to seep into our marriage, and in doing so, he had made his choice. I could no longer carry the weight of that choice or let it define me. Healing was slow, uneven, and often painful, but it came. I began to find joy again, not in grand gestures or sweeping changes, but in the little victories. The mornings I woke up without that familiar heaviness in my chest. The moments I could think about the future without feeling a pang of dread. The days when I could reflect on what happened and know, deep down, that I had done everything I could. In time, I came to see her for what she truly was: a deeply insecure woman who couldn't bear to lose her perceived control over her son. Her manipulation was her own weakness, not mine, and while it had cost me my marriage, it hadn't taken everything. I still had my dignity, I still had my strength. And most importantly, I still had the ability to rebuild my life, brick by brick, into something new and beautiful, something she could never touch. Months turned into a year, and with time came perspective. The wounds were still there, but they had scarred over, no longer raw but part of me now, a roadmap of what I had endured and survived. The clarity I had gained wasn't perfect, but it was enough to start seeing my own worth again, piece by piece. In the quiet moments of my new life, I began reflecting on the lessons I had learned. The manipulation, the emotional toll, the slow unraveling of trust, it all taught me how vital boundaries were, how essential it was to stand firm even when it felt like the world was pushing against me. I realized how much of myself I had given away, not just to my husband, but to the very idea of pleasing everyone around me, even at the cost of my own happiness. I started therapy during this time, a step I had avoided for years, but one that proved to be a turning point. Through countless sessions, I unpacked the weight of what had happened, not just my mother-in-law's influence but the cracks in my marriage that had allowed her interference to grow. I began to see my role, not in the sense of blaming myself but in understanding how I could be better moving forward. One day, seemingly out of the blue, I Received a message from my husband. It was brief and hesitant, just a few lines acknowledging how long it had been and wondering if I might be open to meeting for coffee. My first instinct was anger. How dare he reach out now, after everything? But curiosity and a lingering part of my heart nudged me to respond. When we met, he looked different, tired, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. He spoke cautiously, choosing his words carefully. He admitted to being overwhelmed by everything, to not fully understanding how much his mother's involvement had hurt me until it was too late. He apologized, genuinely, and while his words couldn't undo the damage, they carried a weight I hadn't realized I needed to hear. He told me that things with his mother had become more strained since our divorce. Her controlling nature, once so comforting to him, had begun to feel suffocating in my absence. Without me there to act as a buffer, her influence over his life had grown more direct, more demanding, until even he couldn't ignore it. It wasn't an attempt to win me back, he was clear about that. He simply wanted to acknowledge the role he had played and express his regret. For a moment, I felt the old ache return, the flicker of what might have been. But as I sat across from him, I realized something profound. I didn't want to go back. This was the closure I hadn't known I needed. I left that meeting feeling lighter, as though a weight I'd been carrying for too long had finally been lifted. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a step toward peace. In the months that followed, I continued to build my life. I took on challenges I'd once avoided out of fear, traveling alone, pursuing a career I had put on hold, even learning how to embrace solitude in a way that felt freeing rather than lonely. I began to surround myself with people who uplifted me, who celebrated my growth instead of diminishing it. As for my ex-husband, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was trying to set boundaries with his mother, though it was an uphill battle. Part of me wished him well. Another part couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he was finally confronting the consequences of her control. One day, while cleaning out a box of old belongings, I came across a wedding photo. For a moment, I hesitated, caught between nostalgia and the sharp pang of what had been lost. Then, with a deep breath, I tucked it away, not out of anger, but out of the understanding that my life no longer belonged to the past. I was free now. Free to move forward, free to rediscover myself, and free to write the next chapter of my life without the shadows of manipulation or the weight of someone else's expectations. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how much space I had reclaimed in my life, space that had once been filled with worrying tension and the constant effort to defend myself against someone else's expectations. It wasn't just the absence of my mother-in-law's interference. It was the absence of the version of myself that had once felt obligated to appease everyone, no matter the cost. I began journaling more, putting into words the emotions I had buried for so long. As I wrote, I found patterns, times when I had let myself be overshadowed, moments when I had doubted my own instincts because I was afraid of confrontation or rejection. The act of writing it all down was like unspooling a knot, slowly entangling the web of emotions and memories that had held me captive. I also started saying no more often, a small but powerful word that I had spent years avoiding. It wasn't easy at first. Old habits tugged at me, the ingrained need to smooth things over, to avoid being seen as difficult or unkind. But with every boundary I set, I felt a little stronger. One of the biggest challenges was navigating my relationships with mutual friends and extended family. Some people, knowingly or not, had perpetuated my mother-in-law's narrative, viewing me through the lens of her criticism rather than seeing me for who I truly was. Others had tried to remain neutral, caught in the middle of a situation they didn't fully understand. I made the decision to step back from those relationships that felt toxic or draining. It wasn't easy letting go of people who had once been a significant part of my life, but I knew I needed to prioritize my own well-being. At the same time, I nurtured the connections that felt genuine, the friends who had supported me without judgment, who had listened without trying to fix or take sides. One afternoon, while walking through a local park, I came across a community art class. Something about the vibrant colors and the way the participants seemed so immersed in their work drew me in. On a whim, I signed up for the next session. That class became a turning point for me. It wasn't just about creating something tangible, it was about rediscovering a part of myself that I had long ignored. Painting became a form of therapy, a way to process emotions I couldn't put into words. The act of blending colors, of letting my brush move freely across the canvas, felt liberating. Over time, my apartment began to fill with my own artwork, a gallery of my journey, each piece a testament to the resilience and growth I had found in the aftermath of my marriage. As I continued to heal, I realized something profound. The life I was building now was entirely my own. For so long, I had defined myself through the lens of my relationships, first as a wife, then as a daughter-in-law, always as someone something. But now, I was learning to define myself simply as me. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for what I had been through, but for what I had discovered about myself in the process. I was stronger than I had ever realized, capable of standing on my own and finding joy in the life I was creating. I knew the scars of my past would always be there, faint reminders of the battles I had fought, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they were part of the mosaic of my life, a life that, despite its pain and loss, was still beautiful, still worth living, and still full of possibilities waiting to be explored. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was at peace. As I leaned into this newfound peace, the days began to take on a gentle rhythm. My mornings were filled with quiet rituals, brewing a cup of tea, watering the plants that had become my companions, and taking a few moments to reflect on how far I had come. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving, finding purpose and joy in the simplicity of my day-to-day life. I started volunteering at a local shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but had never made time for. The work was challenging but rewarding, a reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Hearing the stories of others, people who had faced unimaginable hardship yet still managed to push forward, gave me perspective and inspiration. It also reminded me that healing wasn't a solitary journey. It was one shaped by connection and compassion. The more I poured into myself and into others, the more I felt a weight lift. It wasn't as though the pain of the past had disappeared, it still lingered in the background, like an old scar, but it no longer held me hostage. Instead, it became a quiet teacher, reminding me of my capacity to endure, adapt, and grow. One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of old mail, I came across a handwritten letter. It was from my ex-husband. The sight of his familiar handwriting sent a jolt through me, but I sat down and opened it, curious more than anything else. In the letter, he wrote about how much he had been reflecting since our divorce. He acknowledged the ways he had let me down, the ways he had failed to protect our marriage from his mother's interference. He spoke of the regret he carried and how he was working to create boundaries in his life, not just with her, but with others who had contributed to the toxicity of our relationship. He didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did he try to rekindle what we had. Instead, he wished me happiness and healing, thanking me for the years we had shared and the lessons he had learned from our time together. Reading his words, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. For so long, I had carried the bitterness of our separation, the anger at how things had ended. But now, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving him or erasing the pain, it was about freeing myself from the hold that pain had on me. I set the letter aside and stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. The world felt wide open, full of potential. The life I was building now wasn't perfect, but it was mine. In the months that followed, I continued to explore new passions and deepen the connections that brought me joy. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of visiting, capturing the beauty of each new destination in photographs and sketches. I began hosting small gatherings with friends, filling my home with laughter and warmth. One day, while attending an art exhibit, I met someone, a quiet, kind soul who shared my love for creativity and saw the world through a lens of curiosity and wonder. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was a connection that felt natural and forced. We spent hours talking about art, life, and the journeys that had brought us to this moment. As the days turned into weeks and the connection deepened, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't known was possible. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost or erasing the pain of the past. It was about embracing the possibility of new beginnings, of finding companionship and joy without losing myself in the process. Looking back, I knew the road I had traveled was a difficult one. There had been moments of despair, of questioning whether I would ever feel whole again. But standing where I was now, I could see the beauty in that journey, the strength it had revealed, the wisdom it had imparted, and the resilience that had carried me through. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me or by the people who had hurt me. I was defined by the choices I had made to heal, to grow, and to create a life that reflected the person I wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, I